go. So we're recording and we're live. So I'm just waiting for people to drop in. So familiar names, all good. Hello everybody. So we've been having a very nice chat about Sandra's new flat, which looks very lovely. So
not finished.
So she's finally got rid of the children at 45. So yeah, everybody's dropping in fine. Right, we've got a few more to come yet, so and then we'll get going. So is the weather nice with you there? It looks quite sunny.
It's not bad. It's gone a bit grey now, but in London, I mean, I'm in London, but half the time I'm in East Kent on the coast, which is cold and windy, very windy. And so here in this little flat in London, it's just lovely because it's so much warmer. Really much warmer.
My clock to the coast. You can go on your own, dear.
And then with the COVID, he's been able to vote online half the time.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
And it's quite extraordinary. We can be out on a walk and he can vote on his mobile, on a walk.
I don't think they'll go back to the old ways now. Now they've all tasted it. Like, this is much better.
It's not the same as being there,
but more practical sometimes, I think. Right, I think we're all ready to go. So hello, welcome everyone. I'm Becca Harding and I'm chairman of the Society of Women Writers and Journalists. And this is another in our up close and personal series of interviews, and it's great to have you all joining us. So today I'm thrilled to be talking to the talented Sandra Howard, who we're also lucky to have as a patron of the Society. So Sandra was one of the leading fashion models in the 1960s. And I did actually look you up as Sandra Paul and have a look at your covers in Vogue because they do fantastic. They're all online if people want to go and have a look. And you did the cover of American Vogue 2 months running. So she worked as a freelance journalist alongside her modeling before turning to novel writing. And she continues to write regularly for the press. She's written 6 novels and work is well underway on her next novel, which I'm hoping she'll talk to us about later, which is a love story set in East Africa in World War II. Sandra's absolutely involved with 2 national charities, Action, which is a charity helping people to fight drug and alcohol addiction, and she's also vice president of Youth Epilepsy. Sandra also supports First Story, a charity that provides funds to enable well-known writers to hold creative writing classes in inner city schools, and one that we've had something as a society have had contact with as well. She's got 3 adult children and is married to the former British Conservative Party leader, Michael Howard. So we'll have a chat about politics as well later. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions for Sandra, there's a Q&A button at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So please post your questions there. So Sandra, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. And I was absolutely stunned to realise you're going to be 81 in the summer. So what creams are you using? What are you eating? Because I need some. Really do. You look amazing.
I think just keeping going, really. Trotting up and down the hill. Where we live in East Kent, cold East Kent, we're halfway down a long hill. And so all through COVID, we've been walking up and down this long hill, and it's such an effort, And my mobile tells me, if I go to my health app, it tells me that I've walked up 8 flights or something, because it talks about steepness as flights. And so I feel very virtuous when we get back.
Yes, you'll make yourself feel
downhill going home, which is always good.
Yeah, and you're making us all feel guilty now. We'll all be going climbing flights of stairs later.
It slows up very much.
Oh, so tell us about where you grew up and what home was like.
Where I grew up. Well, I grew up all around the world, really, because my father was a doctor in the Air Force.
Right.
He specialised in tropical medicine. So we went off to places that had bilharzia and all sorts of worms and things where tropical medicine was handy. So I was doing my GCs in Singapore, and when I was younger, I was in what was then known as Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, and that was quite wonderful, really. I mean, I was very young, but I could go swimming every afternoon, and
sounds blissful. You didn't catch any of those diseases, though.
And a chameleon as a pet,
Right. quite unusual. That's even worse than me and my pets. With ferrets in the back room. Yeah. So.
It's a wonderful pets because you just put a different book in their little cage and they change bright pink or bright green or bright blue. It's just lovely if you're a child. You know.
So when did you come back to the UK?
After Singapore.
Yeah.
And I came back on a troop ship. I had to stay on because I was just about to take my exams. And my parents had to go a bit early, and there was a very nice couple, a group captain and his wife, who said I could be with them for a couple of weeks to finish my exams, and they were sailing home then, and they'd bring me home on the troop ship. But we were the first ship to get turned away from the Suez Canal in the when the Suez crisis blew up, and so I had a brilliant time because I had a further 3 weeks on board, and you know this ship was packed with young subalterns and army officers, and and there were two. There was the 11th Hussars and the Essex Regiment coming back from Vietnam. It was amazing. So, and one or two of these poor young men had arranged to get married when they got home, and so they had to sort of ring from the ship to say their weddings had to be postponed because they couldn't get home in time, you know, because we were turned away from the canal and had to go all around the Cape.
Oh, so you haven't written a book about that experience then? Oh, that sounds fun. So how old were you then when you came back?
Well, I turned 16 in Zanzibar. So that was
lovely. What a place to turn 16.
That was the first stop after we'd been turned away from the Suez Canal. And we went ashore, and they decided that all these young men decided I should have a party because 16 was quite a thing in those days. You were sort of legal if you were ever going to go down that route.
Oh no, that's wonderful. So when you got home, what did you do then? Because you're on your own.
I went to do A-levels at a school in Essex. So,
right.
Didn't finish them because I wanted to go and be a model. And I had a friend who she had a job with a PA to somebody in television, and she kept saying to me, you could be a model. Why don't you come in? Because I can't have my job unless I can find somebody to share a little flat with, you see. So my parents, rather amazingly, both graduates, they were sort of quite intrigued with this, and they didn't seem to mind. They thought it was in the days when, you know, girls weren't. It wasn't essential. You went to university, and it was really. I'm really sad about it now. You know, I realize what I missed, not going to university.
I think you've made up for it. You've done quite a lot in your own right. So.
That's how I got into modelling, anyway.
It was because of your friend. It's as good a way as any. How did you find it? I mean, it always strikes me as a very strange world, modelling, and I think probably back then even more so, because you're sort of passed around a lot on you as a young, quite vulnerable woman.
Yes, I mean, not. It was, but it was a smaller world. I mean, there were fewer magazines, fewer newspapers, and everybody was friendly. I mean, there was not a lot of bitching, rather amazingly. But if you were just doing the photographs side of it, not the catwalk, which I would have been useless at, then you didn't really sort of need to compete. You got booked for things, and if you were with a girl on a shoot,
right.
Or a guy, you know, whichever, we were sort of friends. We were both there doing the same thing, and so it was friendlier, I think, than it is now, probably.
That's really interesting, because I think it's quite a difficult career now for girls, and
yes, I think elsewhere. And we were a bit older, because now you start terribly young. But you know, I was 18 when I started.
Yes, I've actually passed it in modelling now. So, I mean, you were photographed by people like David Bailey and Norman Parkinson. I mean, that's amazing.
I owe my career to Norman Parkinson, because it's very hard to get started. And, you know, you have to go and do test photographs, which you pay for. And they were terrible because you haven't got a clue. And I was in the Lucy Clayton agency one morning sort of saying, what do I do now? And somebody called in sick, a very famous model. And she said, sorry, I just can't do it today. And they looked at me and sort of said, well, non-Parkinson quite likes raw material. Why don't you go along and see if you'll stand in? And so that got me started. It was wonderful. His son had a stammer like me, so I think it was all to do with my stammer. He was sort of curious about my stammer. So he took me off to a cornfield, and we did endless pictures. And it was a shock for you. Vogue had a little insert called Young Vogue, which was in colour, and colour in those days was quite something.
Yeah.
It was just the breakthrough that everybody dreams of. You
know. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, because she then went on to meet the likes of John F. Kennedy.
I mean, everything's been luck, you know.
You got John F. Kennedy, Frank Sinatra, Bob Dylan. I mean, what are these guys like? Who did you like the most out of those people that you met?
Well, I spent a lot of time with Sinatra and his world, because my first husband was musical and wanted to write about him and his music. And when he came to London, we actually had a mutual friend who knew, I mean, a friend who knew Frank, because she'd rather amazingly, she was a British, quite a matronly friend, young matronly, and she grew up with Elizabeth Taylor, because Elizabeth Taylor spent the first 12 years of her life in England, so through her, this friend had met Sinatra, and that's how we met him. And my first husband said he wanted to write a book about him, and he said, I might want to write an autobiography one day, but you kids can come on out to California and write about me and my music. So we kids went out to California and stayed. Yeah. We stayed with a good friend of Frank's, and saw him on and off for 3 months. Really, it was
amazing. That is such an experience.
And he was pretty mixed up in some ways, but he was incredibly generous character. It's easy to be generous when you're Frank, but he was generous in unknown ways. You know, he would support the families of songwriters who'd fallen on hard times and things. I mean, he was just very kind underneath all the bravado. You know, it was good to see.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's brilliant. So when did you start writing alongside? Because at some point you must have thought, I want to write. Where did that come from?
Well, when back from America in England, I was modelling away and that sort of thing. And I was at a party being chatted up by somebody, and he said, had I any great passions? And I said, I really, really want to write, you see. So he looked a bit bored by this. And he said, well, send me an article. And I didn't know at the time, but he was the editor of the Sunday Express, somebody called John Juna, who people have heard of. And he printed it rather amazingly. So that got me into journalism. So everything's been an accident and a good luck, you know.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's quite good luck. I think you're probably quite good at it.
The piece I sent him, my first bit of journalism, I worked on for days, and it was about going to America to model. And I can remember the headline. It said, "Go West, girl, the new world is your oyster." And it was a boring little piece about modeling, but he then I did about 6 months worth of working for the occasional pieces for the Sunday Express, as it was then. It was a broadsheet then in those days.
So as you were writing about modelling, did people take your writing seriously though, or was it just like did they see it as a bit of a one-off thing? Because of being a model, you know, whether that actually affected their opinion of your writing?
I've no idea what people thought about the articles in the Sunday Express. There was only one about modelling, the first one. I can't remember what the others were about. It's become a blur. And then I did a bit of, then I wrote about beauty for a magazine called She, which is long ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
And this and that. So, but it was pretty bad freelance journalism. It was awful journalism, really. I didn't know what I was doing. But when I got older and I'd been a political wife for a bit, I didn't want to not do anything. And so I wrote an article for a magazine called Spectator. And they printed that. And I got an invitation from an agent to, had I ever thought of writing a novel? And that went to my head, so I had to have a go. I can remember running up and downstairs with this letter, sort of full of excitement, so that was great. And that was a long haul. It took 5 years to learn how to write a commercial fictional story.
So how did you go about that when you said you learned how to write it? How did you have help? Did the editor help?
The agent who'd written me a sort of invitational letter, and she I thought, well, I can't go and see her without an idea in my head. So and I knew I wanted to write about somebody falling in love. What's the obvious thing, I suppose. And I set it against background of two things I knew about, which was journalism and newspapers and politics. And so I wrote sort of one sheet of A4, vaguely the idea I had for a book, and went to see her, and she said, go away and write it. So she liked it, and that was the hard part. And I kept going back to her and saying, is this all right? That's all right. And she got a bit bored, and she sent it out to one or two people who said it was, they didn't have time for raw writing. And so it was a long haul. I never change the story, but I did learn the hard way of how to make it, to know what to do. It was a steep learning curve.
Yeah. So what would be your tips for writers? I was going to ask you this later, but what did you learn in that period, and what would be your tips for writers?
I learned not to be depressed when you get a Dear John from a publisher, because I sent it straight to one or two publishers, because the wonderful agent said, don't give up, but I think honestly you and I have got to sort of give up as a team, you'd better get, which was very depressing. I understood where that she'd done it. And in fact, when I got my first book published, I said in the acknowledgements it was all to do with her, and she wrote the most wonderful letter saying how thrilled she was and everything. She was frightfully grand at Curtis Brown and everything. Anyway, so I think it's just learning not to be depressed when you get turned down, because your hackers go up. But then if you reread what you've done, I thought this is so trite and banal. How could I have sent it out? So I could see, and you learn from your own mistakes, really.
No, that's really interesting. It's interesting that you've kept persevering, even though it took you the 5 years. I think
perseverance. It's all about
yeah, it's a hard graft doing that first one, I think.
And it's wanting to write, I mean, I loved it. I loved playing around with words, and I loved the escapism of it, that you could shut yourself up, and because I'm quite shy, and I didn't have to sort of talk to people. I could shut myself up and be with my characters. I just loved it. It was great.
For someone who's quite shy, you ended up with the leader of the Conservative Party, which is not really, that's not really a shy role, is it?
It's funny enough, it's, you're a backseat person if you're a spouse.
Yeah, but I think you take on quite a lot of responsibility with it, don't you? Do you think so?
Only in that leader role, there's a bit of it. I mean, it feels like you're behind glass and you're looking at and you're looking at yourself, you know, because it doesn't feel real. You know, it's very odd. It's very odd.
Yeah, I can imagine. So when did you meet Michael? What?
Every quarter of an hour for 7 days a week. It was sort of media and demands made, and it was just an incredible 2 years, very full on.
Yeah, I can
and when the
imagine.
election came, the one that my husband Michael was up against Tony Blair, that was I was dreading it for the sort of 2 years leading up to it, but it was quite fun in the end because you can't do anything more. It's all done.
Yes.
And there's a good team that push you onto helicopters or see that you've got a sandwich or do everything. And so really you don't have to think. I mean, you just get told where you're going and what you're doing. And we rather enjoyed it in an awful way. You know?
It's an experience, isn't it, that not many people get. So very
I mean, I think Michael quite had fun. You know? His best thing was when he had an interview during the election campaign with Jeremy Paxman, and he was sort of relaxed and fun. And afterwards, somebody said to him, "Well, I think that was a score draw." They said so. He felt that was his best accolade he'd ever had. Scored.
Yeah,
Jeremy Paxman.
Jeremy Paxman. Yeah. So he's still proud of that. Still brings it up at dinner parties. So do you miss all that world? I mean, you're still involved with it to some extent, but is it the same now, or is it much less than it used to be?
I push him a bit to do the odd interview because he's better when he's stretched, and he feels that it's now if you're the old lot, you should keep out of it and not put your head up and make trouble, you know. So, and I think probably he's right about that. But I don't miss it. You don't stop reading the political bits in papers, you know, and it's there. It's fascinating, and if you know the characters, it's all the more fascinating in a way.
Yes, because you know where their agendas behind the scenes, the personalities, and everything.
Yes, and you know who hates who and everything else. You know.
So did you, when he was very active, were you sort of discussing politics behind the scenes? Did you like tell him what you thought and
yes,
influence in that way?
A wonderful thing, I think, why you know we work so well is that he loves to talk and he loves to try things out, and he doesn't just leave the office at the office. He will, and you know, it's just as well. It's not golf or something I know nothing about, but I mean, it's really interesting that he likes to have your views on things. Doesn't always follow them, you know. We didn't always agree, but I think I sort of could soften the edges here and there. You know, I was the pinko in the closet, really.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a bit of debate in a marriage, actually, and not always agree on everything. I think that's quite healthy. Yeah, good for you for sticking to your guns. So, tell me a bit more about your novel writing. So, are you a planner? Do you plan them completely in advance?
I just start at the beginning and work through. I'm no good at doing the odd scene that I'm going to put in somewhere else. That I find awfully hard to do. Yeah. So I just like to write chronologically. I don't know. And I have a very bad habit of wanting to get the first paragraph, first page of a chapter, just so. And I know that's wrong because I've been told it's much better just to get the thing down, and then the first page wouldn't be what you thought it would be anyway. So, sorry.
You're right. Do you want any water? Are you okay?
So that is a lesson I should have learned and didn't. And I'm not good at making lists of biographies of people, you know, little biographies. So I have to be very careful when I'm sort of editing, self-editing, that I check that the same names. I haven't given somebody a different name towards the end of the book or something, which is horribly easy to do if they're a non upfront character.
Yeah, I do that with the children. I have to be especially careful.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you've got to tie up ends. You know, if somebody has a dog and if somebody's father has a dog and the father dies, you've got to think what happens to the dog. I mean, you need to have everything tying in. And when I wrote a thriller, it was a wonderful jigsaw. You had to make it come to in the end, and I found that great. But I couldn't really do it again. I think it's just one thriller.
So does Michael help you with your book plots when you get stuck in the way that you used to talk about politics with him, or is it?
He reads chapter by chapter. He never sort of tells me what to write, but he picks me up on the semicolons and the commas and things. He says my semicolon drill is terrible. So, and he's good like that, and he's where he was very useful was for research. I mean, there's not many people who can get their research in bed, you know, who can sort of turn to somebody and say, now, if a bomb went off in central London and you were going to meet the head of MI5 and the head of MI6 and the head of counterterrorism at 6 in.the, would you send out for bacon sandwiches? And he knew the answer to questions like that. You know? So
we now know where to go for our research for our novels.
And he was pretty uptight, you know, when I asked about phone tapping and things, you know, but he even opened up a little bit about that too, which is quite interesting.
Just fire with some whiskey. Talking.
Well, because basically it's the permanent secretary who sort of the Home Secretary just sort of okays a phone tapping, but the Home Secretary has the right to stop it. And I said, did you ever stop what they wanted to do? And he said, I did once. And I was fascinated by this. And I asked him, and I said, well, you know, who? And he said, well, it was a journalist. And I just felt it was not right to be phone tapping a journalist. And I wouldn't let them do it.
Him.
Yeah, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said that you use politics in your storylines. Where else do you get your ideas from?
That was a brilliant first book.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I mean, the book I'm writing now is based on a true story because somebody gave me his parents' wartime correspondence. So that's different, very different to write because it's just completely different. But otherwise, the thriller I wrote was when we had the 7/7 bombs, you know, in the underground, and that made such a sort of impression on me that I wanted to write about that. That was my thriller, really.
Yeah.
And so you get ideas from that sort of thing. And honor killing horrifies me too, so I brought in a bit of that too.
Yeah, that is quite scary stuff. So for this do you want to tell us about your new book? Because it's not published yet, is it? So.
It's not published yet. It is finished. I'm sort of hoping to find somebody who wants it. It's a girl who chased after somebody she didn't really know very well at all. And he'd read forestry at Oxford, which was quite an odd thing to read. And he'd gone off with the Colonial Foreign Service to Uganda. So she decided she wanted to sort of travel and go to join him. He didn't know anything about her need to do this. And then the war came and he joined up the King's African Rifles. And she was not put off. She got on a troop ship and went out to Cairo, where she got a job for a year because she couldn't travel on. They weren't allowed to. Sorry. She's got a bit of a frog. So sorry.
Oh yeah, no, you're really battling there. We'll stop for questions in a minute.
Go in a minute. And so sorry about this.
Oh, don't worry. Do you want to have a little break, and I'll see if anybody's got some questions. We'll do that. Did you want to go and get a glass of water at all?
Could I? Is that all right?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine. I'll have a chat with everybody, and you go get yourself a glass of water. Yeah, just make yourself comfortable, Sandra. Right, everybody, we need questions, so please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, because she's had such an interesting life. We really need to fly everything out so that we can while she's here. So please do ask some questions, everyone. I don't know whether you'd seen her Twitter feed this morning, but she's been talking about her triple chocolate cheesecake from Marks and Spencer's. So I was going to ask her about cooking in a minute. But has anybody else got any questions? So if you want to drop them in, that would be great. So you'll be very quiet this morning.
I've got my glass of water. Sorry about that.
Oh, good.
There we go.
Yeah, they haven't asked me any questions yet. So oh, there's one. Jenny's done one. So that's good. Oh, what I was just saying to everybody was that I noticed on your Twitter feed that you like your triple chocolate cheesecake from Marks and Spencer.
It wasn't cheesecake, actually. It was
cake.
Coffee and cake, coffee and chocolate, and the two combos were great, really great.
Oh, sounds nice. And do you like cooking? Are you really into food?
I'm into cooking, yes, but old-fashioned cooking. I've got a friend who said, you've got to throw away all your old cookbooks. It's terrible. You know, you can't have your old Constance Spry and this and that. But I still go back to the old ones.
Yeah, you get used to them, don't you?
I know that there are fashions in cooking, and I'm showing my age, but I'm not really into doing everything with cheese and things.
Avocado.
Avocado.
Quinoa. Quinoa is the new thing, isn't it? I think that was a Gwyneth Paltrow, and she brought that in, didn't she? Yeah. Right, I'm going to put my glasses on because we've got some questions here from people. So Jenny says, you seem to be very optimistic and think the best of people. What's the secret? How have you felt less optimistic during COVID times?
During COVID times?
Yeah.
I think I've just felt how awful it must be to be in a small flat, and because we were in Kent and had countryside all around us, and we could, you know, we had each other, but to be single in a confined space all through lockdown must have been incredibly hard. And so I just sort of thank my lucky stars every day, really. And we were buying and selling a flat in lockdown, which was pretty difficult to do. So that was pretty time consuming in the early stages. And then in the later stages, I love playing bridge, and I've been dragging Michael there and he suddenly got the bug, and so we've been playing with friends online, and you're seeing friends and talking to them, and so every evening, more or less, you know, we had a game, and that was an amazing way of not just watching
TV.
binging on programs. We did a little bit of binging now and then, but not much.
Oh, that's really good. I've never tried bridge, actually. I have no idea how you play, so it's always intrigued me.
Quite good for the mind, they say.
Yeah. So Sylvia's asked a question. She says, I've got Sandra's Ursula's story here, which she signed for me when we first met. I think it was in 2008. She just said she's going to reread it. She's so interested in your story. So I just think it's a hello one and to say that she likes your book. Elaine says, Sandra, did you feel that your husband's important job held back your writing output because you were rushing around with him?
Yes, I mean, it was a little bit inhibiting as to whether I could say what I wanted to say about sex or about this or about that. But he was very sort of open about it all. He didn't seem to mind. So, you know, and with my first book, I got a lot of questions about whether people were certain politicians, and they really weren't. But I think any character is a kaleidoscope of people you've met, really. And so the baddies have, you have somebody sort of in the back of your mind who might be a baddie, and little bits of them go into. So I think that, that it didn't really hold me back, no. And in fact, he was very pleased for me to be doing something that I was doing for me, not modelling or just that. So he was very supportive indeed, which was wonderful, because he had to put up with me forgetting the cleaning and you know, and not doing this and not remembering things.
Oh no, that's great. So just on the papers, has there been a time where you've really been affected by them? Because I think that's one of the most difficult things about being a family in the spotlight, is the impact of what people are saying publicly can have on you. Was there a time where you felt very hurt by it? And
I worried about the children a bit, because the children, you know, they had to put up with it quite a lot in a way.
Yeah.
But they got sort of, you know, there was a time when he went off quite early on, when they were quite small, when he went off to Japan, and the ambassador had a white rose for some reason. So he was always sort of on telly, getting in and out of a white rose. And I would shriek to the children, "Daddy's on television, you see, come and see." And they said, "Oh, not again, Mum, you know, for God's sake, you know, we're busy." And
he's boring, he's Dad.
Boring, yes. So I got to, so they were all right. But they did not want to go into politics.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think anyone who's brought up by a politician wants to go near it. No. So what do you do? Because you've got three, isn't it?
I've got three.
What do they all do?
Well, our daughter works for a little niche business called Good Business, which helps. It's a social, I think its proper name is corporate social responsibility. It helps big companies sort of shave off a mini bit of their budgets to do good works and things like that.
That's great. That's really good.
And it's small, and she didn't want to go and work for a big outfit, you know. And one son is Reverend in New York. I mean, he's got a little church in New York. And the eldest one is he's at the moment in Dubai. He's in marketing, and he worked for a global executive search firm, but they sort of haven't done very well in COVID, and he got headhunted to go off and do a big expo, that huge expo that is going to happen in Dubai in October, I think. And he's having to do the marketing for that. So he's miserable in a way, because he can't get back, and his wife can't go out because of COVID.
Yes, of course.
And they can't understand why they're a red country. Because, anyway, there we are. But that's my
the gosh, it's quite a varied output, really. Very different careers.
Yes,
yeah. So Margaret says, have you any plans to write your memoirs?
Well, no. I wrote a book about the 60s called Tell the Girl, which was a rather odd title. And that is about, it's semi-autobiographical, because it takes the most exciting part of things happening to me that were sort of extraordinary. It was when you feel you're sort of living history in the now.
Yeah.
With Kennedy and Cuba and all that sort of thing. And so I wrote that as fiction, and so I've done it really.
So when did you meet Kennedy, and how did that happen?
Well, rather extraordinarily, a family friend was ambassador at the time that Kennedy was president, and because I was modeling in New York, I could go on the shuttle and have weekends with the family, Ormsby Gores they were called, who in Washington, and that was time when I met him, and they were David Ormsby, our ambassador at the time, his name at the time. He and Jack Kennedy had been good friends in the 30s, and they'd wandered around Europe in the 30s, and so they knew each other really well. It was a time when the special relationship was, it was particularly special in that sense. And so we went to have supper with the Kennedys in the White House one Sunday evening. It's amazing.
Wonderful story. So what was it like in the White House?
The most extraordinary thing about it was that it was the eve of the Cuba crisis. And
really?
nobody knew. I mean, the ambassador obviously knew, and obviously it was just. I mean, I said to Michael, sort of years and years later, could you have done that? Just sort of had 5 friends round the table and let your hair down when you were going to go on television the next day and tell the world that what serious nuclear threat there was. And he said, well, if decisions are made, and he said he couldn't, but if decisions are made and all you're doing is just taking the odd call, he thought some people might want to just relax. Because he did relax. I mean, he was asking all about models and which models he wished would come out from England. And I mean, he was very flirty, you know. and Devonshire was there, and nobody else really. Just this little nucleus of people round a round table, and he kept having to take a call in the room. He'd go to a little window box, sort of, and take a call, and come back and pick up the flirtatious, frivolous conversation just where he left it off. Next morning, when I was going back into New York, there was a sort of hush, and then in the evening he spoke to the nation from the office, saying that the Russian ships were bearing down on Cuba. It was an amazing piece of history to have lived through, really.
Yeah, I can't believe you're in the White House. That's amazing.
And the atmosphere in New York that week, when nobody really knew whether we were going to still be there at the end of the week, was like sort of, there was a sort of huge fall of snow over the whole city. Everybody went about and did their stuff, but nobody was saying much or doing much or playing loud music or anything. I mean, there was just this feeling of nerves, real nerves.
Yeah,
but Khrushchev blinked first, and and so
we forget about all the nuclear stuff now. I mean, it's something we, that was so really there until the end of the until sort of 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, the missile sites were completed pretty much in Cuba. It was all crazy. Yeah. I researched it quite a bit for the book.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what about Bob Dylan? I'm not going to let you get away without telling us about Bob Dylan as well. So what was he like when you met him?
Sorry?
Bob Dylan? Because you met Bob Dylan.
I didn't meet Bob Dylan, no.
Oh, didn't you? No. Oh, Wikipedia lied then.
I went to the cafe where he used to go and play before anybody knew him. And they used to lock down when he was playing so that he could just play and then open up again. And it was just fun to have been there, really. And
yeah, that's magical.
No, I didn't meet him. Would love to have done.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to these jazz places in the village, and I love jazz. I've loved jazz ever since because of those days, really.
Oh,
so Monk and Miles Davis, and going and seeing them in action, seeing them playing. But I didn't actually see Bob Dylan playing.
No,
I wish I had.
Yeah, no, that is. So, do you play anything yourself? Are you musical at all? No.
Absolutely not. Totally tone deaf.
It's either one way or the other, isn't it? You either do or you're tone. Like, there never seems to be anything in the middle.
Because I've got to stammer. People used to say sing, and I would sort of stammer out saying it would be worse if I sang,
Oh.
So,
Oh. So it does sound like, though, because I came from the memoirs question, it does sound like you probably should do something. So I think it'd be fascinating. But Jenny says, who are your favourite authors?
It's usually the book I've most recently read. I mean, you know, it's a very hard question to answer that, I think. I mean, certain books stick in my mind. I read the book by Aaron Darty Roth, I think, I can never pronounce her name, Indian, who wrote a book called The God of Small Things, which was won the Booker, and that stuck with me. I thought that was an amazing book.
Yes,
Aaron Darty Roth, I think she's called.
Yes.
And I love, I've read Sebastian Fuchs' books, and I love those. And Kate Atkinson writes really well, I think. I mean, there are lots of good people out there. You know?
Yes, it's a hard choice, isn't it? Because they're all very different as well, and the approach is so different. It can depend on your mood as well as to who appeals at a particular time.
It's a very hard question, because to think who are your favorite authors, because your tastes change and you move on. And I go back and read the classics occasionally too. With the book clubs, I'm in 2.5 book clubs, which is very tricky.
How do you manage the half? Tell me about the half.
Well, one of the first book club, 2 members had a row, and they decided to split and have their own book clubs. And the littler one, which I call the half, is I didn't know how to say. They both asked me to join, and I didn't know how to say.
Say no.
One to one or the other. So I ended, but one doesn't meet very often, the little one. And then a friend said, would I join her mother's and daughter's book club? And that's lovely, because we meet occasionally. We used to meet over a meal. Now we meet over a Zoom. And because the adult daughters are part of it, you get the young view and the older view of the same book. And that's very interesting.
Oh, I can imagine. That's nice that they're doing it together, actually.
When I asked my daughter if she'd do it with me, you know, she's got 3 small children and a job. I was amazed when she sort of said, well, yes, I think I'd like that. You know, so she comes along.
Oh, that's lovely. So how many grandchildren have you got? What's their ages?
6. And the youngest one was born in New York, and I've got to know him on Zoom, on Skype, and he's just turned 1 at the weekend. So so we're hoping that there'll be a corridor and he'll come over in the summer.
Yeah, you'll get to see them. I know it's quite sad when grandparents have missed the kids for something, because years go by so quickly in their lives, don't they?
Rather a special one, the 1-year-old, because they were trying for 5 years before it happened. So it was lovely when they suddenly produced this baby.
Well, actually, that's quite nice of being able to stay at home and spend time with the baby while he's small, actually, during this period. So I've got one more question from Barbara, and she says, how long does it take you to write a book?
I've taken forever on the one I'm on now, because there's so much research, and it's just been so interesting to read round the Cairo in wartime and the East Africa campaign, and on one side, and then it starts in Germany too, in Hamburg, and so I was reading about that, and so that's taken 4 years really. And my first book took about 5 years, because I've been trying to. Then the ones in the middle take about 2 years each from start to finish.
Yeah.
But you sort of start one. I mean, the time when a book's with the publisher, you have. I mean, there's months before it actually comes out, so you're sort of starting the next one.
The next one.
In that hiatus time, really.
Yeah. And do you find you've always got the next idea before that? By the time you finish the last one?
I did with the first 3, because they were sort of continuing characters a bit.
Mm.
When I got to the fourth book, my editor said, "I think you need a change. You can't keep on with your characters. You must," and that I found harder to make a sort of complete change and get to know new people, because I was, you know, my other lot were friends. You know, we talked about them as part of the family, really.
So. Discuss them over breakfast. Oh. Yes. Well, that's great. I mean, thank you so much, Sandra. I've really enjoyed our chat today. This has been lovely, really lovely. It's so interesting, and some of the things you've done are amazing. I think everybody, because you're so modest about it, and yet you've met these amazing people and been in some incredible places. So thank you for telling us all about it. So if you've enjoyed today, then
thank everybody for coming along.
Oh, that's great. So if you've enjoyed today, then you may be interested in our other online events, which come out in the bulletins, so keep your eye on those for details. And we've also got a conference at Chawton House in September, so do register for that and say that you're interested, and then we're just organising all that at the moment. So thanks everyone for joining us, and goodbye, and hopefully see you again soon. Thanks, bye. Bye.